Why do believers claim miracles for headaches, back pain, or blurred vision, but never for missing limbs? Why do we hear stories of tumors shrinking, but not legs regrowing? Why is there no video of a person without a foot getting it back after prayer? When someone breaks a leg and recovers, they thank prayer. When someone survives cancer after months of chemotherapy, they call it divine mercy. When a car crash leaves a survivor, they say it's a miracle. But when a soldier loses both arms, no one expects prayer to restore them. No church organizes mass prayers to regrow a lost hand. No evangelist promises that. There's a quiet understanding, even among believers, that some things just don't happen. And that's the problem. Prayer is often said to work in mysterious ways. But when it comes to amputations, the mystery disappears. It simply doesn't work. There is no single documented case of a limb regrowing through prayer alone. And this isn't just anecdotal. It's verifiable. The world is full of people with prosthetic arms and legs, yet not one of them ever grew their natural limb back after spiritual intervention. This matters because religious belief often rests on stories of miracles. The idea that a higher power intervenes in human lives, heals the sick, or alters outcomes through prayer is a central claim in many religions. But that claim becomes hard to defend when the results are so clearly one-sided. Why does God restore hearing but not arms? Why help with exam results but not regenerate skin and bone? If prayer really connected us to a supernatural force capable of overriding biology, we would expect at least a few amputees to experience full regrowth, especially given how many people around the world pray every day. Millions of people, thousands of churches, countless gatherings, asking for healing. But the outcome is always the same: 0 regenerated limbs. Some will argue that God chooses which miracles to perform, that healing an amputee would violate some kind of spiritual law or divine purpose. But this argument doesn't hold when we look at how freely other miracles are claimed. Toothaches cured, blindness reversed, a pregnancy after years of infertility. These are all seen as signs of divine favor. Yet a severed leg is somehow where the line is drawn. The truth is more mundane. Things that are subjective, invisible, or naturally reversible are commonly mistaken for miracles. Pain is subjective. So when someone says it went away after prayer, there's no way to measure it. But a missing arm is not subjective. You either have one or you don't. There's no ambiguity. And because prayer never works in cases where ambiguity is removed, it raises a real question about what's actually happening. When a person says they were cured after prayer, we have no way of knowing what role, if any, prayer played. Maybe they were already healing. Maybe the treatment worked. Maybe it was misdiagnosed. But if someone without a foot suddenly had it restored, there would be no question. That would be undeniable. It would be a clear sign of divine power. And yet, it never happens. There's another layer to this. It's not just that amputees don't get healed. It's that religious communities quietly avoid even praying for it. Pastors hold healing services for arthritis, not amputations. Faith healers promise to fix your back, not your missing hand. There's a quiet avoidance, as if everyone knows not to expect too much. As if the limits of prayer are well understood, even if never openly admitted. Why does a belief in divine healing persist, even when the evidence is so inconsistent. Part of it is emotional. People want to believe that someone out there cares, that suffering has meaning, that hope is never pointless. But belief doesn't make something true. And when it comes to prayer, there's a massive gap between what is hoped for and what is observed. Studies have been done on the effects of prayer. In controlled settings, where one group is prayed for and another is not, the results are unimpressive. One of the most famous studies, funded by a religious foundation, showed that prayer had no effect on recovery rates. In fact, patients who knew they were being prayed for had slightly worse outcomes, possibly due to anxiety or pressure. These are not the results you'd expect from access to divine healing. Some will point to the placebo effect. And yes, prayer can make people feel comforted. It can reduce stress, calm the mind, and even temporarily ease pain. But that isn't healing in any meaningful or permanent sense. It's not regeneration. It's not reversal of damage. It's a mental state, not a medical miracle. Religious leaders often use vague language when talking about healing. They say someone felt better, or received peace, or was touched by the Spirit. But these are emotional outcomes, not physical ones. When a limb is gone, no amount of spiritual peace brings it back. If the healing power of prayer were real, amputees would be the ideal test case. The stakes are clear. The result is measurable. There's no room for trickery or interpretation. So why doesn't it happen? One possibility is that prayer doesn't work the way people think it does. Or maybe it doesn't work at all. The burden of proof is not on the skeptic. It's on those who claim supernatural outcomes. And when those outcomes never occur in clear, testable cases, it says something about the claim itself. It's not just a coincidence that prayer works best when outcomes are fuzzy and fails entirely when outcomes are black and white. That pattern is too consistent to ignore. If a God were selectively choosing to heal people, you'd expect a more random spread of miracles. But the fact that nothing ever grows back should lead any honest observer to question what's really going on. The pattern also matches what we'd expect if there were no supernatural intervention at all. Some illnesses get better on their own. Some surgeries succeed. Some people beat the odds. But none of those things require divine influence. They happen every day in hospitals, regardless of prayer. And here's another point worth considering. Animals also recover from illnesses and injuries. Wild animals heal broken bones. Pets recover from infections. No one prays for them. They don't believe in gods. Yet biology does its job. That alone should tell us something. Healing doesn't require belief. It requires time, care, and a working body. People say, well, maybe God has a reason not to heal amputees. But what kind of reason would that be? Why would an all-powerful being heal someone's headache but not restore a child's missing hand? Why stop short of something truly undeniable? Why allow thousands of painful surgeries for prosthetics if prayer could bypass all of it? It's not that the healing is too hard. For a God, nothing should be hard. It would be effortless. So the only explanation left is that it doesn't happen because nothing is listening. Nothing is intervening. And people are left to attribute random recoveries to the thing they've been taught to trust. If prayer were as effective as people say, hospitals would be overflowing with volunteers offering spiritual healing. Insurance companies would pay for prayer sessions. Medical schools would teach divine intervention as part of treatment. But they don't, because when results matter, prayer is left behind. Doctors treat patients, nurses change dressings, surgeons perform amputations. But no one, not even the most devout believer, calls a pastor when a limb is severed. There's something revealing about the kinds of illnesses prayer is most often credited with healing. They tend to be internal, hard to measure, and prone to natural recovery. Digestive issues, depression, even some cancers. These are things that can vary with time, stress, or medication. But a missing limb is different. It is a challenge that demands physical evidence, and the absence of any such evidence speaks louder than any sermon. There have been countless cases throughout history where people claimed miraculous healing. But when those claims are investigated, they usually fall apart under scrutiny. One well-known case was that of a woman who said her eyesight was restored after prayer. But her condition wasn't permanent blindness. It was functional, partial, and likely psychological. She never had a medical record confirming total blindness to begin with. But the story still circulated because people want it to be true. When it comes to amputations, there's no way to fake it. There's no partial loss. An arm is either gone or it isn't. And that's why no one gets up at a revival and says, "My leg grew back." Because that's not something you can claim without proof. The body doesn't grow back limbs. No matter how sincere the belief, no matter how intense the prayer. Some believers argue that miracles aren't meant to prove anything, that God isn't a showman, that He doesn't perform on command. But that argument is inconsistent with religious tradition itself. The Bible is full of stories of public miracles: water turning into wine, blind men seeing again, people rising from the dead. These weren't done in private. They were meant as signs, evidence of power. Yet today, when a camera is always nearby, those kinds of signs have disappeared. The timeline of miracles suspiciously ends as technology improves. The more we're able to verify claims, the less those claims occur. Before X-rays, people said tumors vanished. Before MRIs, they claimed brain damage was reversed. Now that we can see inside the body, the stories become quieter. And when the loss is external, visible to all, the silence becomes complete. It's not just that amputees don't get healed. It's that their stories are missing from religious books, testimonies, and sermons. You would think that if a God really wanted to prove something, this would be the perfect canvas. An undeniable, measurable, spectacular event. But instead, the miracles stay where doubt can survive. Even faith healers, who claim to cure all kinds of diseases, avoid amputees. They might slap a forehead and say arthritis is gone. They might declare someone's hearing restored. But they never stand someone with no legs on a stage and say, "Watch them grow back." Because they can't fake that. Because their illusion depends on ambiguity. And nothing about an amputated limb is ambiguous. And still, believers pray. They gather, they chant, They plead, and when nothing happens, they shift the goalposts. It wasn't God's will. Maybe the healing was spiritual. They'll be healed in heaven. Always an excuse. Always a reason not to question the method. Never a reason to question the claim itself. This leads to a dangerous kind of thinking, one where unfalsifiable beliefs replace evidence, where hope overrides reality, and where people suffer while waiting for a miracle that never comes. Parents of disabled children are told to pray harder. Victims of accidents are told to stay hopeful. Instead of working toward better prosthetics, better therapy, better accessibility, they're pointed toward the sky. It's not just false hope, it's misplaced responsibility. When someone recovers from an illness, prayer gets the credit. But when nothing changes, the person is blamed. You didn't believe enough. You weren't pure enough. That kind of thinking is not just wrong, it's cruel. It places the burden of divine silence on the person in pain. And yet, amputees move on. They go to rehab. They learn to use prosthetics. They return to work. Not because of prayer, but because of perseverance, because of human strength, because of real medical science, because of tools and therapy, and the support of people who understand the reality of the situation. If a miracle occurs, it's in the courage of those who rebuild their lives, not in the silence of the heavens. There is no divine law against regenerating limbs. Salamanders do it. Starfish do it. Science has observed this in lower animals. Nature is full of examples where regeneration is possible. And yet, in humans, it doesn't happen. Not because it's impossible, but because biology doesn't work that way. And no amount of prayer has changed that. We should ask why a God would design creatures that can regrow tails, but not give that same gift to the species made in His image. Why give starfish a regenerative edge, but leave humans to suffer? The more you analyze it, the more absurd it sounds. Unless you stop assuming there's intention behind it at all. In every religion, prayer is offered as a bridge between the human and the divine. But when you remove the stories and look only at measurable outcomes, that bridge leads nowhere. The emotional comfort is real, but comfort is not a cure. Belief is not a biological process. Hope does not knit bone. There is no need to be cruel toward those who pray. Many do it out of desperation, out of love, out of the desire to help. But the fact that prayer feels meaningful doesn't mean it produces results, especially when those results can be clearly measured. And nowhere is that more obvious than with amputations. This topic matters because it reveals the difference between emotional belief and observable truth. It's not about mocking people. It's about asking honest questions. If prayer is powerful, it should show up in undeniable ways. And if it doesn't, then maybe we need to reconsider what we're calling power. When you strip away the rituals, the songs, the robes, and the stained glass, what's left? A request to something unseen, to change something visible. That's what prayer is. And when that change never comes in the clearest cases, we're left with one conclusion. There's no one on the other end. When people ask why prayer never heals amputees, They are often accused of being disrespectful or cynical. But the question is honest. It doesn't mock suffering. It seeks clarity. It challenges a belief that affects how people make life decisions, how they vote, how they raise their children, and how they process pain. It deserves a serious answer, not a dismissive shrug. Some argue that the body is just a temporary shell, that in the afterlife, all wounds will be healed, that missing limbs will be restored in heaven. But this line of thinking is a way of avoiding the present. It places justice and healing in a place that can never be verified. It asks people to suffer now for comfort that might never come. And it silences any critique of what happens in this life by pointing to the next. But even in religious texts, the stories of healing involve real change, visible transformation, witnessed by crowds. Jesus was said to heal lepers, restore sight, raise the dead. These weren't spiritual improvements. They were physical, tangible, observable. If such events truly occurred, why would that kind of healing disappear when it became easier to record, measure, and test? When cameras became common, miracles became vague. When scientific understanding grew, divine explanations retreated. Lightning became a weather event, not the wrath of a god. Disease became a matter of germs, not demons. And healing became the work of medicine, not magic. The question isn't whether people believe prayer works. The question is whether there is evidence that it actually does. Belief and reality don't always match. People believe in horoscopes, in lucky charms, in ancient rituals. But belief alone doesn't regenerate a leg. And that's the difference between faith and fact. Even among those who claim to have witnessed miracles, there's a pattern. The stories change over time. The details blur. The documentation is always missing. There's never a before and after scan. Never a medical confirmation. Just a story. Often secondhand. Often repeated from memory. And in a world with billions of smartphones, that silence is louder than any claim. Prayer never heals amputees because there's nothing to verify, nothing to demonstrate, nothing to review. It stays in the realm of things that can't be measured. That's not coincidence. That's insulation. That's how belief survives in the absence of results. If prayer worked, we wouldn't need hospitals. Or if we still needed them, prayer would be an active part of every treatment plan. There would be prayer-based wards, clergy with patient rounds. But no doctor counts on prayer. No surgeon says, "We'll skip the operation and just ask for help from above." Because when lives are on the line, people trust what works. And that's not because doctors are godless. Many are religious. But they know that belief isn't a method. They know that biology is indifferent to rituals. That broken tissue doesn't listen to spoken words. It listens to stitches, grafts, therapies, and time. People often say, "You can't test God." But we test everything else that claims to work. We test drugs. We test therapies. We test machines. Why should prayer be exempt? If it's real, it should show results. If it doesn't, then maybe it's not what people think it is. There's also a moral cost to this kind of belief. When people are told that their healing depends on faith, they carry guilt when it doesn't happen. They blame themselves. They feel unworthy. And this prevents them from accepting reality, from moving forward, from seeking the best care possible. The idea that divine power could help, but chose not to, creates confusion and despair. And all of it is based on a system that shows no real-world results. The difference between natural healing and supernatural claims is stark. We can see how the body recovers from injury. We can track the process. We can speed it up with therapy, medicine, surgery. But we have never once seen a limb return through spiritual means. Not once. If even one case existed, it would change the conversation. It would be studied. It would be broadcast. It would be in every news outlet. But the absence of that single, undeniable case tells us more than 1,000 vague testimonials ever could. There's also something revealing in how people respond to this question. They don't provide evidence. They don't cite cases. They shift the discussion. They talk about metaphors. They talk about inner peace. They talk about how prayer helped them feel better. But the original question remains untouched. Why does no one ever grow back a limb? Because that would be a miracle, a real one, not a feeling, not a story, not a coincidence, a physical event that defies biology. And despite all the faith in the world, it never happens. At some point, we have to stop excusing the silence. Stop twisting logic to protect an idea. Start asking whether belief is being used to cover the absence of answers. Because when something consistently fails to deliver on its promises, the rational response is not to defend it, but to question it. This doesn't mean people have to abandon comfort or stop gathering or lose their communities, but it does mean being honest about what prayer is and what it isn't. It can be a ritual, a form of meditation, a way to express love or hope. But it is not a medical solution. It does not reverse physical loss. It does not grow limbs. And that's okay, as long as we're honest about it. But when belief replaces reality, it leads to harm. It leads to false hope. It leads to wasted time. And worst of all, it leads to blaming the victim. If someone prays and nothing happens, they are often told they didn't pray the right way, or didn't believe hard enough, or that their suffering has a purpose they just can't see yet. But none of these answers address the core question. They just shift the burden away from the belief and onto the person who's already hurting. That's not faith. That's avoidance. There's a deeper issue at the heart of this conversation. It's about honesty. Not just honesty with others, but honesty with ourselves. Are we willing to examine beliefs that don't hold up when tested? Are we willing to admit when something isn't working, even if it brings us comfort? The idea that prayer heals is based on stories, hopes, and cultural momentum. It's passed down like folklore, woven into traditions, repeated until it's accepted. But repetition is not evidence, and tradition is not proof. The modern world has tools that can measure, document, verify. And when we apply those tools to the boldest religious claims, like the idea that prayer can regenerate lost limbs, they fall flat. There is no trail of evidence, just stories that fade under scrutiny. If someone claimed to have a machine that could regrow limbs, but it never worked when tested. They would be dismissed as a fraud. If someone sold a pill that cured blindness, but it never passed trials, they'd be sued. But prayer makes the same kinds of promises and receives endless exemptions. That double standard persists because religion is protected from the same kind of questioning we apply to every other claim. If a psychic fails, we call them a scammer. If a product fails, we call it defective. But if prayer fails, we're told to blame ourselves, or accept mystery, or defer to an invisible plan. This is not intellectual humility. It's a refusal to hold belief to the same standard as everything else. And yet, people continue to pray, not because it works in any demonstrable way, but because it feels meaningful. It gives them a sense of control when life feels uncertain. It offers a script when words fail. And that's understandable. People want to do something in the face of pain, even if that something doesn't change the outcome. But when prayer becomes a substitute for action, a replacement for reason, or a cover for inaction, it becomes a problem. When people donate to ministries instead of research, when parents reject medical care in favor of faith healing, when energy is poured into spiritual rituals instead of tangible support, that's when belief causes harm. There are children who have died because their parents prayed instead of taking them to a hospital. There are patients who delayed treatment, waiting for divine intervention. There are people who spent their savings supporting televangelists who promised healing that never came. These are not rare stories. They happen in every country, in every decade, and always for the same reason: misplaced trust in something that never delivers in measurable ways. When someone loses a limb, the recovery is long, painful, and complex. It involves doctors, therapists, engineers, support groups, and adaptive tools. That process is slow and frustrating, but real. It's grounded in biology and physics, not hope and wishes. And that reality is powerful, because it means we're not helpless. We don't need miracles to improve lives. We need resources. We need science. We need compassion grounded in what works, what actually changes outcomes. There's more dignity in accepting reality than in chasing illusions. More strength in working with the body than in waiting for divine repairs that never come. And more honesty in saying this didn't work than in inventing reasons for why it didn't. The question, why doesn't prayer heal amputees, is not just a clever argument. It's a test of whether we're willing to follow truth wherever it leads, even if it makes us uncomfortable. Because the answer is simple. Prayer doesn't heal amputees because nothing supernatural is happening. The people praying are sincere, but the process itself is empty. There is no power in the words, no invisible hand guiding tissue to regrow, no divine surgeon behind the scenes. And once that is acknowledged, everything else begins to make sense. The healing that happens in the world happens through human effort, through science, through innovation, through care. And those efforts don't discriminate between believers and non-believers. They work for whoever receives them. That is the real miracle. The miracle of knowledge, of trial and error, of people who dedicate their lives to helping others, not by waiting for permission from above, but by doing what can be done here and now. It's not flashy. It's not dramatic. But it's real. And the moment we stop pretending that prayer is a substitute for real solutions, we can begin to build a world that doesn't just hope for miracles, but creates them. Thanks for watching. If this made you think differently, even for a moment, consider sharing it. These questions matter, not because they win arguments, but because they push us toward honesty, toward truth, and toward a world that values what's real over what's simply repeated.